the eyeball man. Can anyone honestly say they aren't scared of this guy? The dude blacked out his eyeball, so he looked like a demonic Jack Skellington. More like Hack Skellington. Eyeball man's real name is Jason Barnum and is currently living out a 22-year sentence for an Alaska police officer. Barnum's crime was heavily influenced by a hefty addiction to chasing the dragon. 3 officers were investigating vehicle break-ins and burglaries in South Anchorage and spotted a vehicle related to the attacks in a hotel parking lot. They checked out the security footage and saw a man carrying a tote to room 209. Barnum and 2 others were in the room, and when officers entered the bathroom, the shootout began. Barnum was injured in the arm, but they arrested him when he got out of the hospital, and they had to deal with how terrifying he looks, even though he's behind bars. So yeah. Number 9. Eric R. Rudolph. Resourceful and resilient, Eric R. Rudolph quickly got on America's most wanted list. Why? Well, during 1996 to 1998, Eric detonated bombs 4 times in Atlanta and Birmingham, taking the lives of 2 people and injuring thousands. A 5-year manhunt ensued. He was finally caught in May 2003 after he was found rummaging through a dumpster. Later, it was revealed how intense his survival skills were. For 5 years, Eric foraged off the lands and survived off of buried barrels of grain and soy. He learned the schedules of when produce was going to be thrown out at grocery stores and stole what he could where it wouldn't be noticed. His motivation behind the was a compilation of radical anti-gay, anti-abortion, and anti-government. The list goes on. He didn't get along with other people, and when he confessed to his crimes, he showed no remorse. But when he was taken away to go to prison, authorities report that the man had tears in his eyes, knowing he was utterly defeated. What can I say, man? Your actions brought you to where you are now, so sorry about it. Sorry, not sorry. Number 8. Robert P. HANSSEN. The man the FBI was afraid of, and he was right under their noses. Joining them for lunch in the cafe, grabbing coffee with them, laughing at the cooler. But all the while, Robert P. HANSSEN was a mole. On February 18th of 2001, Robert was arrested and charged with committing espionage on behalf of intelligence services for the former Soviet Union and their successors. He was caught red-handed placing a package containing highly classified information at a park in Vienna, Virginia for his Russian handlers. When the FBI searched his apartment, it became apparent his payment was in cash and diamonds with a value of over $600,000. HANSSEN handed over dozens of delicate files, including FBI counterintelligence investigative techniques, sources, methods, operations. He exposed the FBI's secret investigation of Felix Bloch, a Foreign Service officer for espionage. He pled guilty to 15 accounts of espionage on July 6, 2001 and was sentenced to prison without the possibility of parole. He is considered the most dangerous spy in FBI history. God knows what he said. Number 7. David Carpenter. I know Lisa Rinna from Dancing with the Stars because I love a good foxtrot. Love it. But she's actually more well known for being a desperate housewife. But it turns out that her very own mother was actually David Carpenter's first victim. She knew him from work and he offered to give her a ride home, and he had kids and a wife. Soon he was on top of her, hammer and knife in hand, but thankfully a cop was nearby who suspected something was amiss, so she was saved. David was sentenced to 14 years in prison where he was diagnosed as a sociopath with a very high IQ. He was released after only 9 years and quickly went on to commit more attacks against women. Good call on releasing him, just saying. Like what? Ugh. I hate that. I hate that. At one time, he was even suspected of being the Zodiac Killer. Instead, he became known as the trailside killer who would prey on women on hiking trails. He took the lives of 10 people, though it's probable that there were more. Just 2 survived, and officers described that he was a kind of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of behavior. He was super nice, but then he had this insane, psycho, creepy, dark side as well. Number 6. ZACARIAS MASSAOUI. The ADX prison is intended as a holding cell to teach prisoners proper conduct before they are sent to penitentiaries. However, some are so bad that they are never released for fear they might inspire new crimes if allowed to communicate to those outside the walls. ZACARIAS is one of them. He is currently serving out 6 life sentences for assisting the hijackers who carried out the, you guessed it, the attacks on the World Trade Center. MASSAOUI was placed on a watch list in 1999 when he started interacting with Islamist extremists. He could have prevented the attacks entirely, however he lied to the FBI about the Al-Qaeda and their plans to attack the US. He was even supposed to pilot a plane into the White House. He was arrested in August 2001 and went on trial in 2006. Throughout the trial, he praised the Al-Qaeda and was removed for several outbursts. A very different tone to the note he wrote recently in 2020 renouncing Al-Qaeda and appealed to younger Muslims to be wary of their deceptive ways. I really do hope he has genuinely released those ideals. However, he did do it in an attempt to relax his sentence. As recently as 2018, he was still referring to himself as a natural born terrorist. So needless to say, I don't see things relaxing anytime soon. Number 5. The Marathon. Jahar Tsarnaev. Speaking of the ADX prison, there is yet another permanent resident behind its walls. Jahar Tsarnaev is responsible for the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing, which took the lives of 3 people and injured 250 people in the large crowd. This event shook the world, and I remember when it happened. I remember checking my phone repeatedly in order to figure out what's happening and follow with updates, and I'm sure a lot of you do too. He and his brother Tamerlane used 2 pressure cookers packed with explosives and shrapnel. His brother was shot during a police chase while Jahar was taken into custody. He was 19 when he committed the crime and 21 when he was finally tried. The trial consisted of heartbreaking testimonies from families of the injured and the dead. The death penalty was disbanded in Boston for decades, but it was considered for this case as it was a federal case. He was instead given his life sentence to be served out in solitary confinement with no opportunities to communicate with the outside world, and that is probably how it's going to remain for the rest of his life. Wow, so young. Number 4. The NITHARI killers. The NITHARI crimes came to light on December 29, 2006 after 8 skeletal remains of young bodies were found in the drain of a house in NITHARI, Noida. The owner of the house and the businessman Mohinder Singh Pandher and the domestic help Surinder Kohli were arrested. Soon after they were found, even more bodies turned up. The village had been making noise about the disappearances for a while before anything was done, but now the NITHARI killers remain some of the most horrific people behind bars. Over 16 young people fell victim to kidnapping, vicious bodily violations, and death, which believed to have occurred between 2005 to 2006. Both men have been found guilty and the death penalty is in discussion, though has been delayed. Some believe that there is money involved in the case that may result in an unfair result, but considering the severity of the case, release is not really on the table. I'm not gonna lie, it was hard to get a straight story on this. There's a lot of convoluted details across the articles I could find, so if you have more info you want to share, drop it down below. Number 3. Larry Hoover. This dude is so powerful that he was continuing to run his operation while serving out a 200-year sentence for murder. Larry Hoover was, / is, I suppose, the chairman of the notorious gangster Disciples gang. He was convicted 2 decades ago of continuing to run his empire behind bars. Hoover, now 70, is serving out 6 life sentences at the Supermax Federal Prison in Florence, Colorado, a facility that holds the worst of the worst. Mobsters, anyone who'd be a danger to anyone from the outside. It is said to be the most secure in the country. He established the gang in Chicago in the 1960s and has recently decided to try and take some of them down. The indictment accused 7 state and national leaders of the gangster Disciples of racketeering conspiracy, drug trafficking, witness intimidation, and multiple murders, including the 2018 death of a 65-year-old ranking member of the gang on Chicago's South Side. Beware if you've ever crossed Larry Hoover, because even behind bars, you can't stop him. Number 2. James Marcello. I honestly sound like I'm in a 1940s film noir when I was researching this. You'll see why in a second. He is the highest ranking Chicago mob boss in prison, also known as Jimmy the Man Marcello. Now at the age of 76, he filed a petition in June 2020 to have his sentence tossed out. Jimmy was one of 5 top criminals who were convicted of the 2007 Family Secrets racketeering case. He was convicted of taking the lives of Tony the Ant Spilotro and his brother Michael. They were found in a cornfield in June 1986 after being beaten and strangled to death in Jimmy's basement. He was sentenced to life in prison in 2009 and currently resides at the Supermax facility in Colorado, just like Mr. Hoover. Marcello's father was also in the biz, and so was his big brother, Big Mickey. The family had influence. There were crimes that hit the news and crimes no one knows about. Either way, now Jimmy wants out. He's like, come on, give an old guy a break. Not for you, Jimmy. Not for you. And last but not least, Monstrous Maudsley. Whew. When I started reading about this guy, I literally had to step away from my desk. There were some images I just didn't want to read, but here we are. Meet the man so dangerous that he is now kept in a below ground glass box in complete isolation. Not only did he take lives outside of prison, but inside of it he was the man everyone feared. The point that made me turn away was what he did with a spoon, which dubbed him the nickname of Hannibal the Cannibal. Robert Maudsley has been locked away in a glass box just like the infamous villain for over 40 years. He was sentenced to life in prison after taking the lives of 4 people. His crimes were so violent, the cops nicknamed him Blue because that was the color of the first victim. But his crimes did not end behind bars. He brutalized and took the lives of abusers of young victims behind bars in vicious and terrifying ways, just like you would predict people would do in prison. He was so volatile and laissez-faire about it that the only thing the prison thought to do about it was build him his own cage. He is allowed 1 hour of exercise a day. His childhood was riddled with and he would often take most of it to protect his siblings. This violent childhood, along with his extreme intelligence, resulted in a violent appetite. However, after 40 years of psychiatry, appeals are being made to improve his well-being. Honestly, he did some awful stuff. If there's even a way out of the dark for even the worst and the worst of us, then it should be at least attempted. That's my mentality of it, but man, oof, creepy.
Starting off this countdown, we have Richard Matt. Matt's career as a criminal started off when he was young. He was involved in robberies, kidnappings, and then eventually murder. The first murder he committed was of his former boss. He then fled to Mexico to avoid being caught. While there, he murdered a second man while attempting to rob him. In 2007, he was convicted for the murders and began serving a 25-year to life sentence. But guess what? In 2015, he actually escaped the facility with a fellow inmate, and they spent 20 days on the run before getting re-caught. And apparently he has a history of jailbreaks, so I don't know why they just didn't pay closer attention to him. In the end, this was his final escape since he was caught and killed by Border Patrol while trying to flee to Canada. In our 9th spot, we have the dating game killer. This dude gets his name because while police were looking for him, he appeared on TV for an episode of the dating game in 1978. He did this in the midst of his murder spree. In fact, the dater on the show actually chose him, but when they met afterwards, she said that she got a bad feeling around him and they never actually went on a date, which that was a close call for her, because during his appearance on the show, he had already murdered at least 5 women. His date would have probably been his next victim. This killer would often toy with his victims. He would strangle them until they lost consciousness, then he would revive them, and then repeat this process several times before taking their lives. In the end, he was convicted of murdering 5 women, but police think that his kill count is much higher. In our 8th spot, we have the razor blade. This story comes from a prisoner who was locked away in a Texas prison. The prisoner told the story of a fellow inmate who everyone feared. It was this woman who would violently lash out on her fellow inmates. One time, she even put a razor blade in a bar of soap and would use it to cut up other prisoners. When the guards found them, there was blood everywhere. So yeah, I can see why people fear her. I wouldn't want to get on her bad side, let alone even look at her. Moving on to number 7, we have Ronnie McPeters. One of the scariest inmates in the world is said to be Ronnie McPeters. Ronnie was sent to jail for the murder of a 27-year-old woman in 1984. The woman, Linda Marie Baltazar, was running errands when Ronnie came up to her window panhandling. She shooed him away and he left, but then he ended up coming back, this time armed. He then shot her 5 times. As a result, he was arrested and sent to Fresno jail. But his bad behavior never stopped. While in jail, he would set fires, attack other prisoners, and even sometimes would, smear his feces on the walls and floors and sometimes all over his body. Now, he was actually put on death row for his crimes, but he was deemed, and I quote, too insane to be executed. In our 6th spot, we have JOANNA DENNEHY. JOANNA is a serial killer who in March of 2013 went on a 10-day killing spree. She murdered 3 men, but her goal was to murder 9. She said she wanted to be like the killers Bonnie and Clyde. After killing the men, she would throw their bodies in ditches. In fact, she has the title of one of Britain's most notorious female murderers. While in prison, JOANNA has made it a point to prove to other serial killers that she is the best killer among them. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the inmate from hell. So this story comes from a nurse who worked at a prison. She shared the story of the scariest inmate that she has ever encountered. This inmate would go around biting officers in their arms and shoulders. He would headbutt them as well as even punch them directly in the face. He has broken people's bones and even ripped out chunks of flesh off of them with his teeth. Yeah, that must have been terrifying to see, like what the heck. Moving on to number 4, we have Pascal Payet. Pascal Payet is a French criminal who was sent to jail for committing a murder during a robbery in 1997. But he is famous for his daring prison escapes. In 2001, this dude managed to escape prison using a hijacked helicopter. But he didn't perform this stunt just once. No, he escaped twice. So obviously he was caught and then sent back to jail. Then in 2007, he did it again. It only took him 5 minutes. Within that time frame, 4 masked men hijacked a helicopter and took the pilot hostage. They then landed on the roof of the prison and used some device to open the doors and get Pascal out of his cell. Like I said, they were in and out within 5 minutes. 2 days after this escape, an arrest warrant was issued against him. Nowadays, he is never kept at the same prison for more than 6 months, and he is placed in solitary confinement where he is under high surveillance. They don't want him escaping for a third time. In our third spot, we have Damien Fowkes. Alright folks, let's talk about Damien Fowkes. See what I did there? Anyways, this guy, don't get me started. So this guy was serving a life in term in jail for armed robbery. While in jail, he attacked a number of prisoners. He strangled killer Colin Hatch with strips of bedding and also slashed the throat of Soham murderer Ian Huntley. And this is what he had to say to that. He said, "I hope I killed him. I've been planning it for weeks." Now, Ian Huntley did survive, but he had a 7-inch wound that just missed his jugular vein. But that's why Damien is considered incredibly dangerous. In our second spot, we have Mark Hobson. Mark Hobson went on a killing spree in North Yorkshire, England in 2004. As a result, he took the lives of 4 people. But he was also involved in a nationwide manhunt, which involved more than 500 police officers and 12 police forces all looking for him. During that time, he was considered Britain's most wanted man. And this is another dude that is not afraid to get violent with others. In September of 2005, he poured a bucket of boiling water over a fellow killer. And on a number of other occasions, he has attacked other prisoners. As a result, he is another prisoner who is kept under close surveillance at all times. And in our number 1 spot today, we have Robert Maudsley. Robert Maudsley has actually been named Britain's most dangerous prisoner. Now you might be wondering, Lindsay, why is that? Well, oh boy, let me tell you. In 1977, Maudsley and his fellow inmates held another prisoner hostage. They tortured him for 9 hours before cracking his head open and killing him. And rumor has it that he even ate some of the prisoner's brain. As a result, he was deemed the real-life Hannibal Lecter. A couple months later, he murdered 2 other inmates, then casually told the prison officer that during the next roll call, he would be too short. As a result, he's actually kept in an isolated glass cell so guards can see what he's up to at all times. They don't want another hostage situation to occur ever again.
Number 10. Abigail Williams. I'm putting Abigail Williams on this list because the whole ordeal just makes me so mad. By claiming that she was bewitched, she sparked a massive witch hunt, literally one of the most illogical points in history, leading to the most unnecessary deaths of so many people. I hate her. I can't even watch a production of The Crucible without needing to break stuff after. It makes me so mad. Look, I don't know whether her claims were true, that she and the other girls were afflicted because of witchcraft, or the more likely latter event of them eating an infected piece of grain. Maybe that happened, but I'll let you decide. Abigail Williams was living with her uncle Reverend Samuel Paris and started practicing mild witchcraft with his daughter and Tituba and John Indian, his slaves. You know, the kind of witchcraft where you drop an egg in the water and see the name of your future husband, or I don't know, like where you're gonna go tomorrow, that kind of stuff. Apparently they saw a coffin in the glass and that freaked them out, so they started acting weird. Other girls followed suit. Keep in mind they were around 11 or 12. So, alright, imagination. And then Abigail just kept accusing people like all the time, and if you admitted you were a witch, you were pardoned, and if you didn't, you were killed, okay? So technically she was never in prison. But she put a lot of people there on bullshit, and then they claimed possession to get out. So I say that this deserves to be number 10. Yeah, there it is. Number 9, Luis Zambrano. Luis was a man from Queens who took the life of his ex-girlfriend Angie Escobar in her Whitestone home. She was just 28 years old and had just broken up with him when he violently attacked her, inflicting 80 wounds with a pair of scissors. But he didn't just claim that he was heartbroken. No, the reason he killed her was because of 1, trust issues, that's a given, she's an ex for a reason, and 2, you guessed it, demonic possession. A quote from Luis reads, quote, "If you believe in demonic possession, you'd know I was under the influence of drugs and alcohol. I barely remember what happened," unquote, he said. Dude, it caught you. Just fess up, man. The devil doesn't just conveniently show up when you do something really awful, okay? He's busy building the next Apple update and creating pop-up ads, okay? Thankfully, the court saw right through him and sentenced Zambrano to 26.5 years in prison. Game over, Satan! Number 8, Eder Guzman Rodriguez. In Virginia back in 2011, Rodriguez performed a violent exorcism if you can even call it that, on his very young daughter. He attempted to rid her of the demon he believed was inside her, and it ended up costing her her life. When police arrived at the scene, several people were holding Bibles outside their home. Eder stated that while he took his daughter's life, he too was also possessed by a bad spirit. Yeah, it's called being an awful human being. Look it up. The girl was found on a bed, wrapped in a blanket, surrounded by Bibles. Guzman had also knocked his wife unconscious so she wouldn't be able to stop the exorcism. To this day, he stands by his claim while also admitting to the crime. Guzman was sentenced to 20 years and 11 months in prison. Number 7. Dennis Rader, the BTK killer. Man, I hate how this guy is on every list, but here he is again. An interview was released that Rader believed it was a demon that pushed him to take the lives of those 10 people. By now, if you follow our channel or are a true crime fan, you know what BTK stands for. And if you don't, Google it because YouTube won't let me say it. Rader was a very religious man and was a leader in his community, but despite his connection to godliness, Rader confessed that he believes a demon entered him when he was a young boy. How convenient, as that's when he started to notice his dark side. He told Larry Hatberg during an interview, and I quote, "How could a guy like me, a church member, raise a family, go out and do those sorts of things?" he said. Quote, "I personally think, and I know it's not very Christian, but I actually think it's a demon that's within me." Unquote. Or you're just an awful human being saying it together. That's great. Let's move on. Number 6, David Berkowitz, the son of Sam. The son of Sam terrorized NYC for a period in the 1970s and was finally caught in 1977. He would carry out what appeared to be random shootings, claiming 6 lives, wounding 7 more with a .44 caliber revolver. David frequented lovers' lanes, and women even went to salons to rid themselves of brown hair so they wouldn't be targets because they thought that was his thing. Alongside the crimes, postal worker turned shooter blamed his actions on his neighbor's dog, who he said was actually possessed by a 6,000-year-old demon. Apparently his name was Harvey, and Berkowitz was simply following his instructions. Number 5, PAZAZU ALGARED. Now this one is a little freaky because one of the people who lived in the same building as PAZAZU swore he was possessed. The name PAZAZU is actually the name of the demon mentioned in the film The Exorcist. PAZAZU was arrested after authorities discovered a dead body in his backyard, along with another that he helped his wife bury a year prior. If there's anyone on this list that could actually have been possessed, then it might have been this guy. Maybe number 1. He was a satanic fanatic and even went so far as to fork his own tongue and saw his teeth razor sharp. Ugh. An anonymous quote from the man who lived with PAZAZU said, quote, "It was very serpentine and his eyes would kind of get a little like glazy, like almost not there, like the inner part of him would kind of phase away. You could tell when his demons needed something from him because they took over." Unquote. Ugh. Also important to note that the house that he lived in was so gross, it was deemed unsafe for human life. There was filth, human and not, everywhere, demonic and evil symbols on the walls. Ugh, yeah, not a place you'd want to find yourself, especially since the man who lived there might have been the demon PAZAZU himself. Number 4, Michael Taylor. I swear there was something about the 70s that just like bred crazy wacko serial killers. Like, anyone else feel that way? Were they just there all along and we finally started to notice? I don't know, but we have yet another serial killer on our list who also claimed possession. Even before he violently took his wife's life, Taylor suspected that he was possessed by a demonic spirit. He was a simple butcher living in Ossett, England, who was suddenly overcome by a darkness he couldn't explain. He underwent an overnight exorcism performed on him on October 5th, 6th in 1974, and though it reportedly worked, some of the demons, yes, plural, kept hanging on. According to someone involved, they invoked and cast out at least 40 demons, though 3 remained. They were pretty bad. After he returned home, he viciously took the life of his wife, removing her eyes and tongue, most of her skin from her face, and took their pet's life as well. When police found Taylor, he was standing in the street covered in blood, yelling, quote, "It is the blood of Satan," unquote. I don't know what to believe about that one. demonic possession doesn't seem like an afterthought here, whereas it does with the other ones, so what do you think, guys? Number 3, Deborah and Adolfo Gomez. Okay, whether for 5 minutes or 10 years, we all believed at some point that the prophecy about 2012 being the end of the world was true. But it appears no one believed as hard as Deborah and Adolfo Gomez, who were not only convinced that 2012 was the end of the world, but that their house was possessed by a demon. Yeah. The couple was arrested after restraining their children with duct tape in their SUV because they also were demon possessed. Apparently they would often cover their eyes and mouths with duct tape in order to keep the demons out. Oh my god. When police finally caught up with them in Lawrence, Kansas, they also discovered that Adolfo hadn't slept for 9 days. How that happened, we don't know, but it may explain why he thought he was possessed. Sleep deprivation can cause some serious harm. The longest anyone has ever gone without it, I think, was 11 days. And after just 4 or 5 days of no sleep, people start to hallucinate, so maybe that's the reason. Number 2, Algar Schwartz. In 2013, Algar Schwartz from South Africa claimed he had become possessed by vague satanic attacks. Of course. He wouldn't be on this list if he didn't. This was verified by Reverend Cecil Begbie and confirmed that this was the cause for Schwartz's crime. He strangled and then beheaded his victim in an abandoned school in October of that year. Oh my god. Reports say that Algar planned on selling the head to a traditional healer. He was caught and incarcerated, however, but his community stood behind him, weirdly. Reverend Begbie instructed church groups across Africa to pray for Schwartz on the Good Friday following his arrest. Schwartz reportedly felt like pure water was washing over him at the time of the prayer, and now claims the demons are no longer in possession of him. This, however, will not mitigate his sentence. And lastly, number 1, Arne Cheyenne Johnson. Johnson sparked controversy far and wide in a case that became known as the Devil Made Me Do It case. In 1981, 19-year-old Arne Cheyenne Johnson was arguing with Alan Bono over Johnson's girlfriend when Arne stabbed Bono to death. When authorities arrived, you can guess what Johnson said. The devil made me do it. Hence the title of the case. So you'd expect the officer to be like, yeah, whatever, buddy, keep on walking, but no. There is a reason this case is in our number 1 spot. Every paranormal investigator worth their salt, including the beloved Ed and Lorraine Warren, flocked to Connecticut to interview him. But the Warrens were there to defend him because they already knew him. The Warrens told police that in July 1980, Johnson had participated in at least 3 exorcisms involving his girlfriend's 11-year-old brother, David. He reportedly was host of 43 demons. The Warrens stated that at the time of the exorcism, and I quote, Johnson leaped up and cried to the demon, "Come into me, I'll fight you, come into me." From that time on, he was possessed, unquote. The Paranormal Society was split in 2, but Johnson's team was committed. The court had defended accounts of God in the past. Now, it was time to defend accounts of the devil. But despite what you may believe, it wasn't enough, and Johnson received maximum sentence, but was released after good behavior just 4 years later. I love how this list started as Rachel complaining about the Crucible and then went from the totally unbelievable to the absolutely unexplainable. Like, ugh.